It's an emotional day for several families who've been looking for loved ones since the Life Esidemeni shut down. They're being reunited with their relatives as we speak. We're now joined in the studio by eNCA's Masego Rahlaga, who's been covering that latest development for us and was with some of them as well as health department representatives today. Masego, thank you so much for joining us. What do we know about what we believe is 5 people who have now finally been reunited with their families?
Well, Marcel, remember when, the Life Esidemeni arbitration started and we were in those emotional stages? It was about more than 100 patients that were missing. Last year, around this time, they told us 55. Around December, it was 21. And now it's 16 patients that still need to be found. What we know, Marcel, is that of the 5 patients that have been found between November and now, when they sent the statement about the 21, is that they were always with their family members. Most of them were always with their family members. They were with relatives, probably not at the address that was actually noted as where they would be coming from when they were taken to the institution, but they were always with relatives. And so this tells you, again, how bad the health system was in terms of the patients' bookkeeping was really just not... It was non-existent, basically. I remember one time, actually, there was an article in the media when the story broke in the first place. It said, no ID, no file, no ID. That's how they were taken to these illegal NGOs. They were taken to NGOs without files, without IDs. So you just would receive a patient not knowing who they are, what they need, what is it that they need in terms of food and medication, and that's why we find ourselves here today.
Well, one doesn't have to be an expert to know that a proper record keeping is an imperative for any health system to run smoothly, and to save lives, and indeed to keep people alive, as was the case very tragically with Life Esidemeni. What are we hearing from the health department? Because in as much as we know that record keeping is a major problem here, why did it still take them that long to track down these patients, especially now finding out that they were actually with relatives? Communication seems to be non-existent.
Yeah, so they would say since the arbitration and even today when we speak to them is that some of these family members changed the addresses. Some of these families members changed their numbers, and they couldn't get a hold of family members to find out whether or not, they have the patients with them, or even first of all, they couldn't find family members to let them know that they're moving their loved ones. For instance, there was that woman who testified at the arbitration, the Kumete woman, who said her brother, she was looking for him for like a whole 4 months, and then they come back to her 7 months later to tell her that he died 7 months ago. So that's how bad the arbitration, or rather the Life Esidemeni tragedy is. And, with regards to the patients already being with families, how they found them is they had to rope in the Home Affairs Department, for instance, for them to help them. Because, for instance, some of the names would have... In my case, if I was a patient, it would just say Masego and not have a surname. Or in another case for you, it would say Gordon and not have your name. So there's a lot of Gordons, there's a lot of Masegos, and therefore it just made it really difficult. So luckily with some of the patients, they still have been receiving their grants, and they could tell via the SASSA system that these grants are being used. And thank goodness those grants are being used for the rightful owners and not for patients who had already died or who are not around.
Because we do know that does indeed happen on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah.
Now, from what we understand, there are now 16 people now still unaccounted for with regards to Life Esidemeni. What do we know about their cases?
It's 16 people still missing. It's still the same. In terms of finding them, they still need to get the Home Affairs Department to try and help them. They still need to get the Social Development Department to try and find them. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, really. And that's what's been happening. The good thing, though, which I can give them, is that, from 55 to 16. But it's still quite a lot of people that, we don't know where they are. And it's really something that's worrying when you look at the record keeping in the health department. You, as a person who uses the health system, whether for mental health or any other medication that you need, you should be scared that, your filing is probably not up to date. They probably don't really know who you are. And if you have a family member that's in hospital, you need to try and making sure that actually they know who that patient is, where they live, they have your numbers, and they know how to get a hold of you.
And indeed what their medical history is. Just before I let you go, Where does this now leave the families in terms of that compensation that was addressed by the arbitration that was led by former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke?
Well, Marcel, when the retired Deputy Chief Justice announced the award, as it's called in terms of the arbitration, he said that, out of the, you will pay these 134 patients that have been brought to the arbitration, you will pay them 1.2 million rand each, regardless of whether or not the patient died or is still alive, right? But he also did say in his judgment that you did move 1,700 patients. So 134 is just a small percentage of the 1,700. He said, I know that there will be more who come forward. After making sure that those are the patients who fall under the period of the Life Esidemeni tragedy, you will pay those patients 1.2 million rand as well. So these families still have time to go and actually claim for compensation, and that's what the families are telling us they want to do.
So there's still a bit of a road ahead for them before they can close
Marcel,
this chapter.
Just very quickly, one of the family members that we did speak to, we were able to speak to the patient himself, and he actually said, I will never trust an institution ever again. I want to stay here at home. I will die here at home. I'll never trust it. They beat me at the NGO that they took me. They used to bite me. I used to have bruises. So he says he's just he can't construct a sentence fully, but the niece was just telling us what he was saying in full sentence. But I mean, you hear of things like that, and you know that people just, it just took the trust right out the window.
And sadly, these are the cases that we indeed do know about. eNCA's Masego Rahlaga, thank you so much for that update on a very, very important story.